Welcome to the Strength and Flexibility Summit. My name is Jonson, your host, and right now we have Antoinette Weatherly with us. She comes from the UK. She is a mobility specialist and the founder of Up Your ROM being range of motion. She has a passion for female health and vitality, and she's worked with children in sports to bikini and bodybuilding athletes, dancers, gymnasts, combat athletes, and including the elderly. So Antoinette, I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit more and we'll take it away from there.
Oh, first of all, thank you, Jonson, for having me on. This is great. I can't wait to listen to the other speakers you're going to have on. And wow, you covered a lot in that introduction. That's pretty much what I'm up to right now, is just helping pretty much anyone and everyone that wants to improve their overall mobility.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think in the current fitness industry, there are very few good mobility specialists. I think that the term mobility is used very loosely. Anyone who can do trigger point work with a ball or something, they'll say this is mobility. But I think to really understand proper mobility training, it goes beyond just trigger point work or flexibility work. So I think to kick things off, let's help the audience understand what is the difference between mobility and flexibility and the type of mobility training that you do.
Oh, brilliant. This is one of my most favorite questions and something I love speaking about. So the difference between mobility and flexibility. So first off, it's easier to start with flexibility. Flexibility is a range that you are able to have an outside source help you into that position. So whether that's using your hand, pulling your limb in a certain position, or using a yoga strap or the floor, that is generally passive mobility. Active mobility, rather than flexibility, is being able to hold that end range with muscle contraction. So no outside forces other than your own strength.
All right. So from a day-to-day example, I think a very common example we tend to use is usually the splits. Talk about middle splits or a pancake work. I think especially with a pancake, let's say a pancake is where you sit on the floor with your feet out in a straddle or feet apart as wide as possible, and you're folding forward. A lot of the times people just tend to collapse and fold down. The goal is to try to have a nice flat spine as much as possible, but also very hard to maintain if done right. But in the mobility versus flexibility explanation, maybe we can talk, you can share a little bit about the common mistakes that happen from a flexibility standpoint, and then what we want to achieve with the mobility standpoint.
Okay, so I always find pancake a harder one to describe rather than the straddle splits, where you're out with your legs out to your side, because that one's quite a clear indicator of which one's passive and which one's active. Because you have the passive version where you're completely grounded, which I mean your feet and your legs are on the ground. There's no contraction going on in your body. You're just trying to relax yourself in that position. And generally people do it for long periods of time to try and increase the range. But what people can do that makes it active is being able to hold that position off of the ground. So just having your feet as the foundation of that position, that would be active.
Right.
And a lot of people will have quite a gap in between their passive range and their active range in a straddle split.
Yeah. Okay.
Whereas a pancake, I guess, you could put weight on your back and kind of force yourself down 25 kilos on your back. But if you ask them to actively have their chest forward and above the ground, they may find that more challenging. Yeah.
I also think maybe pancake wasn't the best example, but even the pancake, just being in that straddle position where you have your legs out, a lot of people will just fold forward and then we're just relaxing or melting into positions. But where they kind of lack is just that, that quad contraction as well, which, contracting the quads helps shorten the anterior muscles, but lengthen the posterior muscles, which is your hamstrings. So just by having that contraction, you actually be able to get a little bit lower as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think someone who probably really popularized that mobility or active flexibility when it comes to middle split is Jean-Claude Van Damme, who did the advertisement on the truck. I think it was the truck where he goes out on the split and then he comes back in.
On the truck?
Yeah, I think it was the truck or the chairs. But like he basically goes all the way down into that middle split, and then he contracts. I think he contracts as hard as possible, and he pulls himself back out of it without any issue. Whereas if someone who was passive, what would have happened is they would have gone into that split and just collapsed because there was no activation or no contraction at the bottom.
Yeah, or get themselves rather sore trying to contract and recruit that muscle strength to bring themselves back into their starting position. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's quite an impressive skill to see someone just go down into a middle split, but then come back out of the middle split without using their hands, just pull through their adductors. It's really impressive.
It's such a beautiful display of mobility and strength combined.
So having said that though, I also do know that you have a bodybuilding background before doing this mobility training style. Maybe you can share a bit with us about your bodybuilding background and what made you transition to this mobility style training. How has the bodybuilding background kind of helped you with this transition? Things like sets, reps, programming, do they look the same? How do you treat mobility training when it comes to your personal training?
Okay. Yeah. It's a very mixed story when it comes to this. When I first ever started a movement practice, it was actually pole dancing. And I was that kid that had no strength for the monkey bars at the park. So I started pole dancing from no strength whatsoever. So going from pole dancing, I was like, I need more strength. I need to kickstart this. I want to get advanced in this sport. So I went to the gym and I started learning how to do weight training. But with that, my body got super restricted, and I'm going to call it tight. Like I couldn't do the things that I want to do on the pole that involved being in a flexible position, because I'm the most immobile, naturally person you'll ever meet. I'm not naturally flexible. I don't have a gymnastics background or anything. So I went from the pole dancing to the gym. And then I started doing flexibility practice to get myself flexible enough to be strong and mobile on the pole. But it was a very long process. I wasn't really getting anywhere. And I got a few injuries on the way because I was trying to pull myself into positions that I actively couldn't hold or contract behind. So that's when I first saw a physio back in England. And she told me, you've been overstretching your hamstrings. Like I thought my forward bend it's rubbish. I need to keep on practicing. So I was in these stretches for passive long amounts of time. And then, so from that, I started incorporating more strength work into my weight training. So it was still kind of working with passive mobility, but with the strength training in. And so that kind of got me so far. And when it came to my mobility training at that time, I was trying to do it every single day and mixing it in with my gym work and my pole dancing. And it was very overwhelming. I kind of felt like I didn't have enough time to even reach the goals or spend the time on what I wanted to do. Yeah. And there was a lot of guesswork in there. So it was a very unsure time for me. And then what I discovered was strength behind your movements and the quality of using contractile strength. And then I discovered that I actually didn't have to do my mobility practice as much. So I was able to fit it in around my gym training, around my pole dancing, and have plenty of recovery time in between for the mobility training. And that's when I started to see results. Yeah. I saw that less was more.
That's a very interesting concept. And I think with regards to mobility training, that kind of seems to be the key, or like one of the key points is that less is more. But conventional thought process or like conventional training, most of us would think like, oh, if I want to be better, I have to do more, right? Yes. Maybe you can help us to understand why less is more in this case.
See, I always like to use bodybuilding as an example of this. Like, it's a typical one as in if you wanted to get big biceps or you wanted to bigger, better pull-ups or something, you wouldn't train it every single day. Like, your body is going to want to recover. You won't see much progress if you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. There's going to be a point where your body's going to be like, no more. So it's the same for mobility training. If you're doing it with strength and contractile work behind it, your body is going to benefit from those few days in between training. And also, as a bodybuilder background, I love isolating areas when it comes to mobility. So I know I've got enough recovery in between each session. So it's training smart. It's knowing how to lay out your mobility practice to pretty much prioritize the recovery more than anything, because then you've got quality over your training rather than quantity.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's a good way to explain it. Essentially, it's like the growth and the gains happen in the recovery phases, not in the training phases, right? So you work hard doing your training, but allow enough recovery time for the growth and repair to happen. And then you progress from there, and then you get better. But if someone who's like, let's say they're training for a middle splits or a back bend, and they're training twice a week, just particularly on the back bend, if their progress is, let's say, slow, maybe not at a it's not halted, but it's just slow, would you still recommend for them to train less in that case?
It depends what they're doing to train towards it, what type of training they are doing, whether they're thinking of the back bend more than just back flexibility, whether they're including the quads, hip flexors, shoulder extension, internal rotation of the shoulders. It all factors in. But sometimes with my clients, if they're training something twice a week, they benefit a lot of the times by me taking away one of those sessions and focusing on something else. Perhaps the foundations of that movement and regressing it slightly. And then they see better results. It's different for everybody. It depends how much your body will accept it, because flexibility training and mobility training isn't a straight line. There's always going to be ups and downs, and you just got to figure out what's right for you.
Yeah, it's so interesting because when you talk about the back bend, in my head, the back bend is just, we're just going to reach back, you know? But he was like, you've got quads, you've got hip flexors, you've got shoulders, and it's like, it does all come in together. We do have to open that up. We do have to work on those things as well.
Not only
but not only just opening up like hip flexors, you still have to be able to be strong enough to support positions as well, which is really interesting to think about that.
Yeah, and we didn't even include the hamstrings, glutes, the wrist mobility. There's so much to it.
Yeah, wow, that's great. Yeah, we can clearly see that you've spent a lot of time in your craft and mastering your craft, I would say.
It's hard not to when you enjoy it.
Yeah, there is something that you've mentioned before that I think is really interesting, and I'd love for you to elaborate more on that to help people understand mobility training a little bit better. And that would be mobility incorporates strength and brain to muscle connection. You said making best friends with your central nervous system to know these ranges are safe. And I'd love to know more about what do you mean by like the brain muscle connection? What do you mean by, get to know your central nervous system?
Well, I find that there's no such thing as your body being tight. I've heard once this saying before, that it's your muscles being pulled in a direction of discomfort. So your body protects yourself, basically. It protects you from pain and injury. So if you're in a range and your body can't contract, or you don't have that brain to muscle connection, your body is going to protect you, which is going to stop you from furthering that range. So with this type of mobility training, what you're doing is the minutest movements, or lifting up against a weight, contracting those muscles to your body to realize, wait, I can contract in this range. This is going to be a safer range for me to go into. And it's something that obviously takes a lot of energy, a lot of muscle contraction, and that's where the recovery comes into things. So it's a lot about that brain to muscle, learning what's safe, and developing on that. So a lot of people will have to start with the foundational moves first, like build strong glutes, hamstrings. Hamstrings is always a great example, because I find a lot of people, when I used to teach classes in the UK, they would always come to me and be like, my hamstrings are tight, and they would request that I'd spend the class stretching their hamstrings. Mm-hmm. And then I put them in the most simplest hamstring strengthening exercise, or even a mobility test for their hamstrings, so I can see whether they're weak or not. Yeah. And they can't even lift up their leg in a lunge position, lift up their heel. So then it shows to me they've got no contractile strength in their hamstrings to even develop that range. Yeah. So it's a lot about training smart and finding out which areas are not firing up for you, and then increasing that strength and range in those positions.
Yeah. That's a really good point. It seems to me more like just getting to know what's going on with the body. Yes. So it's kind of going to lead me into my next question about muscular structural imbalances.
Oh yeah.
The conventional training wisdom is, I've got a tight hamstring, I need to stretch it more to help loosen it up. Isn't necessarily the case. It seems to be, we need to know whether the hamstring is actually tight, or maybe it's somewhere else that's not engaging or not activating enough to allow the hamstring. So it's compensating in that sense.
Oh yeah. And a simple test when it comes to people. Sorry,
go ahead.
I was going to say, a simple test for this is when I see people doing toes to bar, are they able to straighten their legs and lift their legs up, giving them the quad and hip flexor and core strength? And if you reverse that movement, so instead of going up with the legs, you're actually on your legs, folding over. It's the same thing, just reverse. Yeah. So this is the strength aspect, and this is the passive mobility coming down. If you're not able to contract those legs and keep them straight and locked, then you're most likely you won't be able to have a decent forward bend. Yeah. So it's kind of working with the posterior and anterior chain, and getting things happy and strong.
Yeah, but I feel like with that, let's say passive mobility wise, we could work on folding over or bending over, allow ourselves to sink down into position. Like myself, for example, I think I have not too bad of a compression, like a forward pull from a passive side, because I can reach the ground with my palms flat and reach behind, which is pretty good. But then when I'm hanging from a bar and I'm trying to lift my legs up, that's a real challenge, And then for me, it's like, my hamstrings are not tight, but what it is, it's more like my hip flexor or my lower abdominals is not contracting enough to allow for that engagement.
Yes. And you can practice and improve these things through Moyles, which is a great tool, which stands for Maximum Overcoming Isometric Lifts. Yeah. So all you do is you're in a seated position on the ground, and you put a weight plate on your shins, and you're driving the legs up against it. And that's going to be contracting all the muscles you need to increase your forward bend without weakening the hamstrings. So it's like working around it and working on where the weaknesses are, rather than adding onto the weaknesses through stretching.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So that's kind of like a new term for me, Moyles.
Yes.
I only learned it when I met you, and you shared some of the programming with me, and how you how you work with clients and things like that. But I actually never had used Moyles before, or used that in any of my training until I've met you. And I think that it's a really interesting way to reach that mobility goal that we have, or that I may have. How do you discover Moyles? Like, how do you come about it? Why does it work in the training in terms of like reaching your mobility goals?
It works in the training in a way where you are able to contract and tell your body it's a safer range. So that's where I find it beneficial. And also, when it comes to passive mobility training, it can be quite boring, and you're treating your mobility training as your strength training. You're going to be more focused and present and engaged with what you are doing. Yeah. Sorry, what was the first question? I got lost on that one.
Yeah, it's how did you come about figuring out moils? Because for me, I come from a very typical CrossFit, functional bodybuilding, sports style training. Moils is something I've never heard of. Like, I think I have spent a little bit of time trying to understand mobility, trigger point work, and things like that. It's something that's never come up in terms like moils has never ever come up. So for me, I found this very unique. It's like a very unique way of programming for someone.
Oh yeah.
So like the benefits of programming moils. How do you program moils for people, or for, let's say, if I was going to program something for myself?
Yes. So the first question of how did I discover it?
Yeah.
That was through Joachim Hilderson, which from what I understand is one of your speakers.
Yeah.
On this too,
which is on the summit as well.
Which is going to be great. He introduced me to it, and then obviously through myself, I found a lot of weaknesses in there and things that I was lacking. But also, I invested in my own coach at one point, which was Body Flex, and that showed me how I could translate it to loads of different mobility methods and got me creating more. Because obviously, when you're being coached by something, it's just for you. So you need to learn how to adapt that for your own clients, and the foundations of that was great. I learned a lot. And then when it came to, was the question, sorry, how would I program it for my own clients?
Yeah, I would, like, if let's say I kind of understand what moils is now, and I want to start incorporating that into my own program, how would I put that in? Sets, reps, how often should I do it? How many times can I do it?
Oh yeah. So if I was somebody that's not being coached and wants to try it out themselves, I would first find out, where are your weaknesses? Like, do you struggle lifting up your legs? Are you able to isolate your glutes? Like, you've got to go through everything. And then from that, I would treat it just how you would with your weight training or body weight training. Maybe twice maximum if you're doing the same movement. Once if you need the recovery time and you're new to it. I would say 3 sets is generally enough. And then what I'll do is I would start off with smaller, a little amount of tension time. So the time that you're spent in your moils, I would start it up at like 3 seconds, and the moils where you're driving up against the weight. And I'll do that 3 times. And then what I'll do is I'll remove the weight and then do body weight. So just 5 lifts, and then incorporate a final hold. Because what you've done there is told your body what you want it to do. And then without the weight, you may see a slight lift at the start. And then as you progress, then you can just increase the amount of seconds that you're contracting for.
Well, is there like an optimal number of seconds you want to have that moils for? Like, no more than 10 seconds, because 10 seconds is a long contraction.
It is a long contraction, especially when you're doing 10 seconds times 3 with no rest, because you tend to contract 10 seconds, come back down, contract again for 10, and then you repeat it, and then you remove the weight and you do more lifts. So you want to build up to that strength to be able to do that. So it's always beneficial to start with the 3, then maybe increase it to 5, and then jump up to 10 and see whether you're able to do it. Your body tends to cramp up if you're pushing it a little bit too far and it hasn't got the muscle tension, to be able to do it. Your body will kind of tell you, like, no, this is too much of a jump ahead for me. So then you have to kind of take a step back and then go back into it and just see whether it comes back again.
Okay. So having said that, though, does that mean cramping is not good?
Cramping can be a manner of things. Sometimes it could be your body dehydrated. Sometimes it could be it's being fatigued. Sometimes it could just happen on the first set, and then you won't even get any cramping for the rest of your training. So I wouldn't say it's a dangerous thing. It's a thing where you just have to not pay attention to it, and it will disappear. Because when cramp is coming and you focus on it, and it builds and it gets worse and worse and worse. I found with my own training, if I haven't drank enough water before I train, or it's very hot, because it's very hot in Bali, I could cramp up, and all I have to do is ignore it, give myself a moment, go back into it, and it's like it hasn't happened. But it depends. Sometimes a lot of cramping, and it could be a sign of fatigue too. And then obviously you have to incorporate deloads into your training, like you would with your weight training. You got to do the exact same thing with your mobility training.
Right.
So even if you don't feel like you need the rest, you just got to be smart about it and think, when was the last time I actually took time off?
Right. Yeah. I think that was one of the things that I found when it came to the mobility work that I did for the Dragon Squad that you shared with me.
Oh yeah.
The cramping just, I mean, it was great. You know, in 6 weeks, I saw huge progress from going to like barely being able to bend at the knee. I actually was getting to almost shoulder to the ground, and that's just 6 weeks progress. You know,
wow,
which is amazing. You know,
yes.
And I think that's really the importance of having a good mobility coach, because it's very clear to see, especially in your Instagram account with your clients, that you have the results that they get in such a short period of time, you know, from like a 4 weeks to 6 weeks or 12 weeks. And you see people who start with like barely being able to hold an L sit, and they're like more or less into a V sit at the end of like the, it's like, what? That's crazy.
That wasn't even the plan.
Yeah, and I feel like I've been working hard and just trying to get an L sit in the last, I don't know, like 10 years. And it's just like, nope. And here you are, like 4 weeks later, clients are doing, you know, getting your great compression, good strength, and it looks amazing.
It's about having the right tools, no guesswork, plenty of recovery time. Because a lot of the results that I show on Instagram, they're only training twice a week. Or if it's the bespoke mobilities, they're training 3 times a week. So it's just about training smart and also knowing what not to waste your time on. Yeah.
I mean, I think it really shows the importance of just having a really good coach. And I think when it comes to mobility training, you know, you if you have a good coach, you definitely will get the results you want to. And, you know, if you're in a space where you're just kind of a little stalled, or you're maybe frustrated of not making much progress, I think this is the best time to actually have a coach come in and like help work with you. And it's so interesting to see that, you know, even if you're training once or twice a week, you know, if you're talking about twice a week for 4 weeks, that's only 8 sessions. And, you know, like it's literally a 45-degree kind of gain you make in that. And that's just really impressive to see. You know, it's a good testament to the work that you do with your clients.
Thank you. And it's them putting the hard work in. I'm just sat on the other end on my laptop or on my phone being like, do this. And they do it. And when they trust the process, they recognize that less is more. They get great results, and they start to trust, and they see it for themselves.
Well, you also put in the work prior to, you know, to kind of gain all this knowledge and practice it on yourself and work through that as well. Which is fantastic.
It's hard because I first did an L sit. It wasn't even a full L sit. I remember I was on the end of the high P bars, and someone told me to do flutter kicks, and that's with your legs down low. And I couldn't even lift my legs to do the flutter kick. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've never felt so weak. And that was at my prime of bodybuilding. Like I felt so strong. And I was like, I can't even lift up my own legs. So then I started to try and L sit on P bars. And I could barely hold a couple of seconds. My legs were bent. So just once a week I had it programmed in to do. And then I was like, wow, I've got my L sit now. How far can I actually take this? And so that's where it all came from.
Nice. Fantastic. That's great. Just to touch a little bit more on your training approach. You said that mobility training, we should treat it like a strength training. So, you know, do you put that as like your main focus for the day? Because for the most part, when it comes to mobility training or flexibility training, we tend to think of like that's more like the accessory or more towards the end of your training sessions, right?
Well, when it comes to my mobility training, I see it as the foundation of my work, but my strength and my strength and bodyweight movement is what I would always do first. And then it's the mobility training afterwards. So I try not to affect my outside training and my outside goals, whether it's like ring muscle ups or doing floor work. I always prioritize that Monday, Wednesday, Friday, that is the mobility days. The other days of the week are strength and I always do it before. So I always make sure I have a spare 40 minutes to an hour at the end of training to be able to get it in. And sometimes if I'm pushed for time, I adapt my program to incorporate supersets. So I'm working the anterior and posterior chain together, and that's a good way of getting great results, but also spending a shorter amount of time training. So there's ways you can adapt it to fit into your schedule.
Right. So what you're saying is mobility training doesn't really take a lot of time to, anywhere from 1 to 3 times a week, each session being 40 to 60 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
And doing it, you just do it at the end of your session. Like you get what you need to do, what you normally would do at the gym.
Yeah.
Get that done. And then I find most of my clients are able to put aside and prioritize that 40 minutes 3 times a week. It's not that much time if you're able to organize and shuffle around other things and commitments in your life.
All right. Yeah. I mean, essentially, an hour in a day is kind of like 4% of your day.
Yes.
So, we could give 4% to actually helping us feel and move better, which in the long run becomes the longevity aspect. That we just want to die as young as possible.
Yes, right? Exactly. And a lot of my clients, they do this from home.
Yeah.
So it's minimal equipment. They just have ankle weights at hand or just a weight plate. Sometimes they don't even have a weight plate, but they'll use a bag that's full of heavy objects just to get that tension and the moils involved into the movements. We can get very inventive when they obviously prioritize that time for their training, or they have children, or they have to work from home, or back in England for such a long time, all of the gyms were closed. Yeah. So they had to adapt, but they prioritized it because they had goals and they had a vision in mind of what they wanted. So they worked towards it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's really more of a testament to their determination to achieving the goals that they set themselves out for.
Yeah.
I'm going to skip on to the next question, which is kind of more on the recovery aspect, because mobility training, it's kind of different, but not really different as well. Like you said, it treated like a strength training session. So if we treat it as a strength training session, but I feel like with my experience with mobility training, especially having worked with you for a little bit, was that, man, I get so sore. Incredibly sore. It's also sore in the places that I never thought existed. It's so interesting how the body reacts to that. What are some of your recovery methods and that you program for you prescribe for your clients? What do you get them to do to help recover? Because from what we've learned so far, recovery is more or less the most important part of the training. It's where the repairing happens, it's where the healing happens, it's where the gains are made. So what do you recommend people to do to recover from mobility training?
It depends what they have at hand. For myself, my own recovery, I like to incorporate the hot baths, sauna, massage if I can here and there. But I generally just let my body recover with time, with a good diet. And same with my clients. They can tell me they feel sore. Yeah. And if they're too sore to train their next session, we either switch up the program, change which day it is, or they have an extra rest day. Mm-hmm. Or if this is happening on a regular basis where they don't feel like they are recovering very well, then I'll implement a deload week. So they'll have a whole week off, then they'll return back to their program and they may even come back stronger. Yeah. It's just having to listen to your body and seeing what it actually needs. Yeah. But yeah, definitely you do get very sore from this type of training, especially if your body's not used to
it. Do you recommend people, especially, I think rest days are always the tricky one for people who train. Rest days, is that the day where you just, lay in bed all day and don't do anything? Or do you still want to kind of get out, be a little bit active, walk on the beach or go for a walk somewhere, what do you think is better, kind of like a more active recovery day versus like just chilling out in bed?
Well, I always like to use this as an example. Imagine, well, I'm sure we can all relate to this. Have you ever spent a whole day on the sofa just binge watching Netflix, when you get up from the sofa, your body is so sore. You don't feel great. So I like to treat recovery the same. Like having a deload week doesn't mean do absolutely nothing. Like you said, it's a great idea to go for walks, gentle exercise, focus on other areas, whether it's like if you're only training lower body mobility, perhaps move on to maybe upper body strength, but not intense amounts of work, just enough that you can get your body moving, get the blood flowing.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I think that's also really important for people to understand. Like for me, some days when it comes to recovery, I'm just like, man, I just want to stay in bed all day.
Yeah.
But you're right, you know, like once you get out of bed, it's just like, oh man, body got stiff. It's just not the best feeling, you know. You don't feel as recovered as you could be. Whereas if you just go for a simple walk, like a 30 minutes, half an hour to an hour kind of walk.
Go for a swim.
Yeah. And I think one of the things is really a lot of people tend to forget, because we kind of like deep dive into training so much, is that we're training a lot, and we have to kind of remember to enjoy why we're training. Like, why are we training in the first place? Are we training for life, to do sports, to do something with it? And I mean, yes, I get that we love training, but also taking the training outside and having fun, I think is also a big aspect of that.
Yeah, we can all be guilty of that. Sometimes it's hard to take that deload week, but you got to override that passion to train and just be like, just take a step back. You'd benefit from it. You can reevaluate your program or your training when you return to it, see where you need to move on from. It's just a good way of stepping back and then taking a look at what you're doing and what you need to prioritize.
Right. I'm going to hop back into programming real quick. Not to like, I guess it's picking your brain, but not to give away your secrets as well. But if I'm someone who's new and I looked at your Instagram and go, wow, that's really cool, I'd love to work on that. How do I go about programming for myself, especially with regards to mobility? We already know we program maybe once to twice a week. Do you work in cycles? You said there's going to be a deload at some point. Cycles, sets and reps, how do we kind of go about doing that? How many focuses can we have at one time?
I would say to start off with, have perhaps 2 focuses if there's a mobility goal or a movement that you're into. If it's like a movement like a dragon squat, then you've got to see, have you got decent ankle mobility? Do you have the single leg strength? Do you have the external rotation? Do you have the compression strength? Sorry, the external rotation of the hips. It's like breaking down the movement and seeing what muscles are involved, and then having a look at yourself, like, where do I lack the strength and mobility in those areas? And another thing I've noticed is when I see people do their flexibility practice or their mobility practice, they tend to have their favorite go-tos, things that they feel super comfortable and happy in. And that comes a lot with passive mobility. You see someone has their favorite routine or stretch and they will do it every single morning. And you've got to see if it's not challenging you, perhaps it's not something you should spend time on. So if it's not challenging you, then it's obviously not something that, if it's not a challenge to you, it's not an area to work on. You've got to always shock your body, basically. Keep it working, keep gaining that strength. So I would say start off with maybe 5 exercises in each session. Start with low amounts of tension, and that means duration. Don't go for 10-second holds, go for maybe 3, and then try that maybe for 3 sets, and then just see what works for you, see what's a struggle, and then what you find is a struggle tends to be what you need to be working on.
Right. Yeah. Okay, that's a good way to put it. And also a very good point to note is just, like you said, if you're doing something and it doesn't challenge you anymore, then don't train that anymore. Right? And it's just because your body's adapted and you're good at it, so you're only going to get better when you're challenging yourself. If you're already good at something and you keep training that, you may get better at it, but then everything else becomes a lack. So having that in mind, You know, for me, if I want to challenge myself, for example, my body type is not great for gymnastic bodyweight type movements. You know, like my arms are long, I'm a tall dude. Doing pull-ups is just takes forever to get to the top of the bar. Likewise with doing dips, you know, even if I go into things like a hollow hold where I train in my core, my arms just go so far. So it's exhausting. It's exhausting. I just don't like it. What is maybe an advice, or like what is your mental space in terms of like trying to push yourself? You know, when you're programming, you go like, oh, I really like doing middle splits. I really like doing back bends because I'm good at it. I'm getting better at it. I really enjoy it. But the mental capability to kind of like shift and go, hey, I'm good at it now. It's time to do something I'm not good at. And in my head, I'm just like, I don't want to do that. Like, tell me about your thought process and how you kind of shift that mental space for yourself.
Well, even if it's something that you enjoy and that you've progressed a lot in, you could always make that exercise harder by incorporating weight. Or if you're very good at the middle splits, incorporating active hold, or perhaps adding load to it, or doing your middle splits, but perhaps using arm balance instead and actively having your feet off the ground and trying to lift. There's always ways of doing what you enjoy, but making it more challenging. And when it comes to programming for myself, and when it's things that are not great and enjoyable for me and that are challenging, I document it. I take photos. I write down how it feels. I at least do it for 3-4 weeks, and then I check in again with myself, take a photo, take a video. And when I see the improvements in something that I once struggled with, then it gives you the drive that you are doing something that's good for you and you're going in the right direction.
Right.
It's all about acknowledging your own progress and, you know, patting yourself on the back for it.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of something that one of my coaches told me before from when I started one of my education programs that I did. I think the coach mentioned something like, we see a lot of clients that, you know, they go into a global gym. Global gym is kind of like a fitness first, your like general kind of gym. And they've probably been going to this gym for like 20 odd years or something, or like 10, 20 years. And they have this very set routine, you know, they go in, they start on the treadmill 20 minutes, then they come off, and then they get on like this, a leg press machine, then they go to like a chest machine, so on and so forth. And they go through this routine. Monday is like chest day, Tuesday is legs day, Wednesday is so on and so forth. And they've been doing this for like 10 odd years. And then in the 10 odd years, like they're not really, they've made their progress already. And then nothing has changed in the last maybe 2 to 5 years, but they still keep doing that same routine. So that's kind of the point where you go like, hey, it's time to make a change. It's time to change up the program. It's time to do something different.
Step out that comfort zone.
Yeah, step out of the comfort zone to see even greater progress. So I think that kind of just came back to my mind. It's like, oh yeah, we should do that.
Yeah, people are scared of change sometimes. They want to stick with what they know, and they're not willing to step out of that and see what they're capable of doing in the longer run. So it's always good to, you know, get uncomfortable to see what you're capable of.
Yeah. In your experience working with your clients, after what period would you get them to start changing up their program in that sense, or like changing their focus? Is it after one cycle, after like half a year, then they like made good progress on this one thing, and then you change up the focus for them?
I actually do it. It's quite full on when we work together. So they will be doing their routine, but filming their exercises and their drills, and they send it to me, and then I can see their positioning, see their strength, and then I either progress it from there or fine tune it and change it for them. So their program's always changing, but they will have the same structure to it. So the same aspects of what they're training on, because we go through a self-mobility assessment. So I know exactly what their requirements are. So as they grow stronger and more mobile, we can continue to change it as they go. Sometimes people will be on the same program for 8 weeks with a deload week incorporated into that duration. but it's different for everybody. And it's, like I said before, it's never a like straight journey to mobility. You're going to have ups and downs with it too. It's just being consistent with it. So it's all about just what's right for them, because they're completely unique. So no plan is ever the same to somebody else's. They're always going to have different focuses. They're always going to have different strengths and weaknesses. Yeah. So it's different for everybody.
So the best coaches will always answer with it depends.
I should have just said it depends.
It depends. It really does depend on the individual and the adaptation and how they take it on, how well they recover the stress that they have in their day and things like that. So it really depends how consistent they are with their training and working towards their goals too.
Yes, it depends, Jonson.
It depends. Yeah, great. Okay. That's all great points, and it's really great to kind of like dive deeper into understanding mobility versus flexibility. I think we're almost to the end of a session. There is something, I think maybe just one more question that we can go through, and maybe not so related to the mobility, or maybe it is, you can let me know. But I understand that you've, from your bodybuilding career to shifting to mobility training, you have a shift in your diet as well. And for the last 3 years, I understand you've been more on an animal-based kind of diet, which is not very conventional at the moment. And I'd love to know more about a bit more on how that's helped you with your training, your recovery, the kind of diet you were on before. Any injuries, like does it help with the injuries? Like why this animal-based diet?
So when I started, bodybuilding, I was generally eating a seafood diet. So I was just eating whatever. And then I got more into that world of bodybuilding, and it was like, you've got to have your carbohydrates, fat, and protein. So then I started eating chicken and rice and broccoli. That was literally my diet. And I was eating 6 times a day. And I ended up with quite a few health issues with that through poor nutrition and lack of fats and the lack of hormone health, of looking after myself. I just thought the exterior, if I'm fit, if I've got a 6-pack and I've got muscles, then I'm healthy. I didn't really think about health from within. And then later on, after I met Dom, which is from Origins Nutrition, he kind of was like, with these health issues, you can't just cover them up with a pill. These come from within. So he introduced me to eating more fats, eating more meat, cutting out foods that were contributing towards my illnesses. And from that transition into eating an animal-based diet, I ended up recovering faster. I had more energy to train. My health issues disappeared. And I found injuries are going to happen to us here and there. Like, nobody's invincible. Sometimes we're going to push ourselves a little bit further than we should. And if an injury does come up, I find that my recovery is pretty fast. I find that I can just focus on the rehab and the strength work, and I just have a diet that helps along the way. And it's good for mental health too. I have that focus now, whereas before I was just so hungry all the time. Yeah. I didn't enjoy my training as much closer to the end, because it was about 6 years I was eating my chicken and rice and protein shakes, and it wasn't enjoyable. Now I can focus on my training, then I can have a great meal, and then I can focus on my work. It's just been a complete change to my lifestyle.
Yeah. Because 6 meals a day, that's a lot of time that it takes to get 6 meals a day. And it's literally you eat, you train, you eat, work, eat, nap, eat, train.
Oh yeah, you need that nap.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot, especially with all the carbs that you're taking in as well. That nap probably kick you in somewhere in the mid afternoon. Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe just to wrap things up, Antoinette, if you could give us one advice that you would share with anyone who's interested in mobility training.
I would say stay consistent. If you're not seeing results as quick as these mobility programs that they sell online or flexibility challenges, then just focus on what you find challenging. pay attention to your own progress. Don't pay attention to somebody else's, and just see what works for you, and just, again, be consistent.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. If people want to know more about what you do and the programs that you offer, we can look it up at upyourrom.com. Was that it?
Yes, upyourrom.com.
ROM for range of motion. And if you want to get inspired and check out some of the work that Antoinette does, we can find you on Instagram at netty.upyourrom.
That's the one.
Netty.upyourrom. I also know that you've been doing something pretty new on your Instagram post recently with IGTV, and just little like short, 5-10 minute segments of delving deeper into mobility training, helping people to understand how to program, or and exploring different movements and things like that. So if you are not sure where to begin, I would say Antoinette's Instagram page is a place to begin, and to get inspired and to get lots of really good information.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's good because I've been able to put together those videos, but with examples, so people have a more visual, like a visual learning process, rather than hearing about it. They can actually see it put into practice.
Yeah, cool. That's great. Okay, Antoinette, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being a part of the summit. I'm sure that everyone in the audience listening, they'll take away a lot of information from this. And I'm sure they have a bunch of questions to come back to you. So again, if you want to find out more, look up upyourrom.com or netty.upyourrom on Instagram.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us today. So see you soon. Take care.
Bye. Take care.